Windsor Castle hasn't seen this kind of turmoil since the days of Diana. A storm is brewing behind its stone walls, and at the center of it all is Princess Anne steadfast, proud, and furious. When Camilla dared to insult the late Queen Elizabeth's legacy during a private dinner, Anne didn't just respond, she declared war. And in a stunning act of royal defiance, she banished Camilla from Windsor itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was meant to be a quiet evening and intimate dinner between senior royals in the Queen's private quarters, one of the last untouched sanctuaries of Elizabeth's reign. The table was dressed with formality, the kind that only royalty understands, but the mood was tense beneath the polished surface. As the conversation turned to the Queen's long-standing traditions, Camilla made what she would later claim was an innocent remark, a comment laced with a dismissive tone about how outdated some of the Queen's policies had become, hinting that the monarchy needed to finally move on from the past. The words hung in the air like a poisonous fog. Anne, seated across from her, froze. Not a flicker of emotion betrayed her face, but the silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that suffocates thick, cold, and unforgiving. To outsiders, the moment might have seemed like a mere misstep in royal etiquette. But to Anne, it was an unforgivable betrayal of her mother's memory. Camilla hadn't just insulted a monarch, she had insulted the woman who had carried the weight of a kingdom through war, scandal, and transformation. A woman who had never faltered. Anne's silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. Underneath her composed exterior, decades of buried frustration erupted in quiet fury. The insult was merely the final spark to a fire that had been smoldering ever since Camilla's ascent to Queen Consort, a title Anne had never accepted, and never would. Anne saw Windsor Castle not as a royal residence but as sacred ground. Her mother's spirit lingered in every hallway, every photograph, every echo of footsteps on its ancient floors. Camilla's presence there had always felt invasive, but until now, Anne had tolerated it for the sake of unity. That tolerance ended the moment Camilla trivialized the Queen's reign. Anne didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. She simply stood, excused herself, and left the table. But in her eyes, a decision had been made. Camilla would not step foot in Windsor again, not while Anne drew breath. Behind the polished smiles of public appearances, tension had been growing between the two women. Since Charles's coronation, Camilla's influence had expanded rapidly. She had taken over several patronages and even made subtle attempts to remodel some of the Queen's former rooms. Anne watched, silent and alert, as Camilla attempted to reshape the monarchy in her image, an image that Anne believed dishonored everything their mother had built. While Charles appeared to be caught in the middle, unwilling to confront the rift, Anne had no such hesitation. She was the one royal who never cared for public approval, never needed headlines or admiration. What she cared about deeply, fiercely, was legacy. And Camilla had just trampled on it. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss. The press captured the smiles, the small talk, the dutiful waves. But within the walls of Windsor, battle lines had been drawn. The dinner had ended, but the real confrontation had just begun. Anne withdrew into silence, but it was the kind of silence that signaled a coming storm. She began speaking to trusted staff, subtly reclaiming authority over certain spaces in Windsor. Camilla's scheduled visits were quietly canceled. Invitations were rescinded without explanation. And behind closed doors, a plan was being set into motion, one that would culminate in an unprecedented move in modern royal history. But this wasn't just a dinner squabble, it was the final crack in a long-fractured royal foundation, and Anne was about to blow the lid off decades of resentment. To the world, Anne was the dutiful royal, the Queen's rock, silent and composed. But behind palace doors, she'd watched Camilla rise with a smug smile and a crown on her head. Now, that long-held anger, buried beneath layers of protocol and loyalty, had found its moment to erupt. For decades, Anne had carried herself as the silent sentinel of her mother's legacy. She bore the weight of tradition not for glory, but out of principle, out of duty. When others in the family faltered, Anne endured. And when Camilla emerged from the shadows into the glaring spotlight of royal power, Anne watched with restrained disdain. Camilla wasn't just a woman marrying into the institution. She was, in Anne's eyes, a walking contradiction to everything Queen Elizabeth stood for: discipline, sacrifice, integrity. The very notion of Camilla sitting on the throne beside Charles, donning the title of Queen, was not only unpalatable, it was, to Anne, unforgivable. And though she never voiced it publicly, the battle lines had long been drawn in her heart. After Charles's coronation, the shift became impossible to ignore. Camilla didn't just settle into her role, she seized it. Public events increasingly centered around her. The media began describing her as the monarchy's modern face. Charities previously tied to Anne were suddenly redirected or reshaped under Camilla's brand. Even within family events, Camilla's presence loomed large. Seating charts were altered, speaking orders rearranged, invitations amended. Each change was subtle, but to Anne they were cutting daggers cloaked in civility. It wasn't just about influence. It was about erasure. Her mother's legacy, her own decades of unwavering service, were being whitewashed under a new reign that cared more about appearances than principles. Anne found herself haunted by memories, moments where she had stood alone defending the Queen's decisions. She remembered being the only voice in family meetings pushing back against public scandals. The quiet conversations with Elizabeth, who always trusted Anne to hold the line. She remembered how her mother clung to protocol, believing it was the thread holding the monarchy together. And now, Camilla was pulling at that very thread with a smile that masked ambition. Every time Camilla laughed off an old tradition, every time she spoke of bringing the crown into the 21st century, Anne saw it as a veiled attack on the very foundation that Elizabeth had spent her life protecting. But the deeper conflict was not with Camilla alone, it was within Anne herself. She loved her brother, truly, and she knew the pain he carried after decades of public scrutiny. But in his devotion to Camilla, Anne saw a man blinded, a man willing to rewrite history to soothe his own wounds. Charles had chosen his happiness. But at what cost? Anne stood at a crossroads between loyalty to her brother and loyalty to the legacy of the woman who had worn the crown with grace, even when it cost her everything. Anne didn't seek a crown. She never wanted glory. But she would not let her mother's memory be tarnished by opportunism wrapped in royal silk. The palace was a chessboard, and the moves were growing bolder. Camilla's influence wasn't confined to banquets and handshakes anymore. It had begun touching matters of state, of protocol, even succession planning. Anne sensed the danger, how easily the narrative was shifting. The new queen was being painted as the peacemaker, the restorer. But peace built on revisionism, Anne believed, was no peace at all. Behind her composed exterior, a storm of indignation and sorrow brewed. She had stayed silent too long. It was time to act. Time to protect not just her mother's legacy, but the soul of the monarchy itself. And then, as Anne prepared her next move, she uncovered something Camilla never expected, an old royal promise that would flip the monarchy upside down. Buried in the Queen's personal effects was a sealed letter. Only a handful knew of it, and fewer still had read it. But when Anne stumbled upon it during a private visit to the Queen's study, everything changed. This wasn't just personal now, it was constitutional. The Queen had left behind a final request, and it didn't include Camilla. The room smelled of old books and silent grief. Months had passed since Elizabeth's passing, yet Windsor's private study remained untouched. It was Anne's sanctuary now, a place where she could sit alone and feel the presence of her mother, still echoing in every carefully placed item. That day, she wasn't searching for anything in particular. But as her fingers brushed against the edge of an ornate box tucked behind the Queen's desk, she found it, a cream envelope, sealed with the royal insignia, marked with words that stopped her breath. To my daughter. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. This wasn't just correspondence. It was a message from the grave. The seal cracked open, and the words that followed would forever change the course of Anne's loyalty, her resolve, and the crown itself. The letter was handwritten. No aids, no formality, just the Queen's voice, clear, commanding, yet filled with affection. Anne could almost hear her reading it aloud. It was as if Elizabeth had known the future would be uncertain. As if she'd seen, from her perch atop the monarchy, that chaos would follow her absence. And in those pages, she entrusted Anne with a final task, not ceremonial, not symbolic, but vital. The message was precise. Camilla, while Charles's chosen partner, was never to assume personal residence in the Queen's private quarters. Her patronages were to remain untouched, preserved for Anne or Catherine women Elizabeth believed upheld the monarchy's dignity. It was not a judgment. It was a warning. The Queen feared that allowing Camilla full access would erode the last fragments of the crown's moral core. The words carved into Anne's heart like stone. She read them again and again, each line heavier than the last. The Queen had written of the danger of confusing personal affection with national responsibility. She expressed deep concern that the institution she had upheld with unwavering strength was now teetering on the edge of reinvention not through progress, but compromise. And as Anne sat there in silence, the floodgates broke. She wept, not because of sorrow, but because her mother had trusted her with the truth one final time. Alone in that dimly lit study, Anne shed the weight of silence she had carried for too long. Her grief transformed into purpose. Anne rose from the chair a different woman. She was no longer merely a loyal daughter mourning her queen. She was now the protector of her final command. That letter wasn't just ink and paper, it was the crown's last line of defense. Anne knew what it meant, knew what she had to do. Camilla had crossed a line, and now the Queen's voice, silent to the world but roaring within Anne, demanded justice. This was no longer about etiquette or emotion. It was about duty. Elizabeth had made her intentions clear, and Anne would see them carried out, no matter the cost. With this letter in hand, Anne no longer questioned her next step. She would confront Camilla directly, and it would shake the castle to its core. No aides, no cameras, no Charles. Just two women, bound by the crown, torn by legacy. In a room heavy with royal history, Anne faced Camilla and delivered the one word no royal ever wants to hear: banished. The air inside Windsor's private library was still, suffocating with the weight of unspoken truths. Anne had chosen this setting with purpose, not just for its privacy, but for its symbolism. This was where her mother had signed state papers, consulted prime ministers, and pondered over matters of grave national importance. It was sacred ground, and today it would host a confrontation that had been building for years. When Camilla arrived, her smile was thin, her posture regal, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness. She didn't know what Anne wanted, but she expected resistance. What she didn't expect was a reckoning. Anne didn't offer pleasantries. She motioned toward a chair, but Camilla remained standing, a deliberate gesture of defiance. The silence between them stretched, brittle and sharp. Then, Anne reached into her coat and laid the Queen's letter on the table between them. No words, just that envelope worn at the corners, opened and resealed more times than Anne cared to count. Camilla barely glanced at it before letting out a soft, mocking laugh. A relic, she said. Sentimental nostalgia. Those words, so casually dismissive, landed like blows. Anne didn't flinch, but her hands tightened around the arms of her chair. The line had been crossed, not just in spirit, but now in voice. Anne's fury rose, not with fire, but with ice. Her words came slowly, each syllable cutting with precision. She spoke not as a sister-in-law, not even as a princess, but as the guardian of a legacy too sacred to be rewritten. She accused Camilla of attempting to whitewash history, of eroding the monarchy's foundations by prioritizing popularity over principle. She reminded her of the Queen's decades of discipline, her sacrifices, and her unyielding sense of duty, things Camilla could never embody, let alone replace. Camilla met her words with scoffs and smirks, calling Anne stuck in the past, accusing her of being jealous, irrelevant, and clinging to a world that no longer existed. She said the public had moved on, that the Queen herself, were she alive, would have accepted change. But Anne knew better. She had the proof in her hands. Then came the moment, quiet, precise, devastating. Anne stood and, with the voice of authority that silenced entire rooms, told Camilla she was no longer welcome at Windsor Castle. The banishment wasn't ceremonial. It was absolute. No more dinners. No more private visits. No more quiet strolls through gardens that had once belonged to Elizabeth. Camilla's expression changed then, no longer amused, but stunned. She realized this wasn't a warning. It was an edict, Anne wasn't asking. She was commanding. And behind her calm delivery was decades of restrained pain finally set free. But Anne's bold move wasn't just a personal act, it was about to trigger political shockwaves across the monarchy. News of the confrontation didn't stay buried for long. Within hours, the palace corridors buzzed with whispers Anne had done what even Charles wouldn't dare. And now, the royal family found itself on the edge of civil war, with loyalties tested and alliances shattered. The royal household, long known for its discipline in maintaining silence and unity, now pulsed with tension. The walls of Windsor, once mute witnesses to centuries of royal power, became conduits for secrets that moved faster than ever before. Prince Edward was among the first to break ranks not publicly, but within trusted circles. Quiet and often overlooked, Edward had kept his reservations about Camilla close to the chest. But behind the scenes, he offered Anne a silent nod of support. He too had endured the slow erasure of their mother's traditions, had watched with a clenched jaw as Camilla took liberties that were never hers to claim. For him, Anne's act wasn't just bold, it was overdue. And in private, he confessed that Camilla's presence had caused more disruption than stability. Across the palace, another figure kept her silence, but her absence was louder than any words. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, declined to attend a key event that Camilla had organized just days after the banishment. There was no official reason, no explanation. But those who understood the rhythm of the royal calendar knew this was no scheduling mishap. Catherine's loyalty had always aligned with duty, grace, and quiet strength, the very qualities Queen Elizabeth embodied. Her decision to pull back was not a statement, it was a stance. And though she remained publicly neutral, the press quickly read between the lines, amplifying the signal without a single quote. Inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles was unraveling. Furious, cornered, and conflicted, he found himself trapped between the two women who defined his past and present. Anne, his sister, the relentless guardian of his mother's memory, and Camilla, the woman for whom he had risked reputation, crown, and scandal. Charles's loyalty to Camilla was unshakable, but Anne's defiance struck a nerve he couldn't ignore. His silence only made matters worse. While he avoided the cameras and buried himself in briefings, speculation raged. Was the king losing control of his own court? Had the Windsor dynasty fractured beyond repair? Tensions exploded further when William, usually measured and diplomatic, clashed with Camilla over a planned public initiative meant to modernize the royal image. William had grown tired of the spin, of the press-friendly narratives that painted Camilla as the monarchy's saving grace. He knew the price of rewriting history, and he saw Anne paying it in real time. Their exchange behind closed doors was brief, cold, and irreversible. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The message was clear: Camilla had overstepped. And now, the heir to the throne was no longer pretending otherwise. Outside palace gates, the press devoured every morsel. Leaked stories, unnamed sources, speculative op-eds, every tabloid had a version of the truth. The crown in crisis. Windsor at war. Anne versus Camilla. The rift no one can repair. The banishment had gone viral. And with it, the public began to polarize. Social media flooded with hashtags, debates, and think pieces. Some saw Anne as a protector of heritage, a woman of principle. Others cast Camilla as the unfairly targeted queen, a modernizer caught in the storm of tradition. But one truth was undeniable: the monarchy had split into factions. And every royal move now risked igniting further chaos. And as the monarchy teetered, Camilla made a desperate move of her own, a PR war that threatened to destroy Anne's legacy forever. If Anne thought silence would protect her, she underestimated Camilla's cunning. Within days, a series of leaks painted Anne as controlling, unstable, and out of touch. But behind the headlines was a calculated campaign. Camilla wasn't backing down. She was going for Anne's throat. The backlash didn't erupt, it slithered. One morning, the tabloids carried a curious headline: Princess Royal's iron grip, is Anne fit for the modern monarchy? Then came the stories carefully placed, anonymously sourced, laced with venom. Allegations resurfaced about Anne's cold parenting style, how she had once been labeled the most aloof royal mother. Old interviews were re-examined, taken out of context, and spun to suggest a woman hardened by bitterness. Within hours, online forums began churning with commentary, and soon after, TV pundits joined the noise. Anne, the fortress of royal tradition, was being portrayed as the relic holding the monarchy back. The strategy was subtle, but the damage was sharp. Each article, each whisper chipped away at her public image, creating the illusion of a royal unhinged, ruled by jealousy rather than justice. What the public didn't see was how organized it all was. The sources had patterns: former aides tied to Camilla's press network, sympathetic journalists from lifestyle magazines Camilla had long cultivated. And then came the performances. Camilla, ever the picture of composure, appeared in a well-timed televised interview, her words carefully measured, laced with grace, but not without intent. She spoke of the difficulty of adjusting into a role surrounded by history and expectations, of forgiveness and moving forward with kindness. She never once named Anne. She didn't have to. The implication landed like a dagger. Camilla wasn't the aggressor. She was the misunderstood figure caught in the crossfire of tradition. And the public, always hungry for narrative, began to shift. Behind palace walls, even Anne's most loyal supporters began to hesitate. Aides muttered about the danger of escalation, about preserving unity. Whispers grew: she's becoming too emotional. She's letting her grief lead. Anne, the woman who had never sought public sympathy, suddenly found herself at the mercy of it. And yet, she refused to defend herself. She knew engaging would play into Camilla's trap. So she held firm, watching in silence as her reputation was dragged through the mud, her dignity weaponized against her. But the final straw came not through headlines, but through defiance. A high-profile charity gala, held just outside Windsor, had traditionally been hosted under Anne's patronage. But this time, it was Camilla who walked through the doors, flanked by cameras, smiling as if nothing had happened. It wasn't just a PR appearance. It was a calculated invasion. Anne had made it clear Camilla was no longer welcome in any sphere connected to Windsor. And yet, here she was, wearing the crown's presence like armor, daring Anne to respond. The provocation was clear. The message was louder than words. But Anne didn't flinch. She didn't break. She didn't rush to the press or stage a counter-campaign. Instead, she quietly turned her attention elsewhere, to someone whose voice was rising in power. Someone who had watched from the sidelines but could no longer stay silent. Someone who, like her, carried the weight of legacy in his blood. But while Camilla played the media, Anne turned to someone unexpected, someone with the power to settle the score once and for all. He'd stayed silent for too long. But when Prince William realized that his own future and his mother's legacy was at stake, he stepped into the fray. And what he said behind palace doors would send Camilla reeling. The moment William walked into Anne's private chambers, the atmosphere shifted. He wasn't there as a son, a prince, or an heir. He was there as a man who had watched from the shadows, weighing every move, every insult, every deviation from the path his grandmother and mother had paved. Anne shared everything with him: the letter, the confrontation, the media attacks. And for the first time, William saw the full scale of what Camilla had done. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His silence was a vow. A line had been crossed, and he would not stand idle. Hours later, a royal emergency meeting was convened. Charles, already reeling from the fallout of Anne's defiance and the tabloid war, now faced his greatest challenge yet: his son demanding answers, not as a subject, but as a future king. William was direct, controlled, and terrifyingly clear. He laid the Queen's letter on the table, just as Anne had done. Then he turned to his father and said, "You've already sacrificed one legacy for love. I won't let you destroy another." He wasn't talking about Elizabeth anymore. He was talking about Diana, the unspoken shadow that still loomed over the crown. Behind those closed doors, the temperature dropped. Charles, torn between the woman he loved, the sister who refused to yield, and a son whose future was now in jeopardy, faltered. William demanded clarity on Camilla's role: no more blurred lines, no more silent power plays. He made it clear, if Camilla continued to assert influence over matters tied to Windsor, succession, or Elizabeth's patronages, he would begin withdrawing from key royal duties. No speeches, no appearances, no support. The monarchy, he warned, would fracture publicly if the palace didn't act privately. It wasn't a threat. It was a prophecy. And everyone in that room knew it. William's words were a thunderclap that reverberated beyond titles and blood. He stood not as an emotional son, but as the bridge between tradition and the future. He invoked his grandmother's unwavering discipline and his mother's enduring compassion, both legacies now under siege. "I've lost one mother's legacy," he said, eyes fixed on Charles. "I won't lose another." In that moment, a generational war quietly ignited. The firm began to fracture not by scandal, but by principle. Charles, cornered and crumbling, offered no answer. Camilla's position, once secure through marriage and public image, now trembled under the weight of royal descent. And William, once the stabilizing force of the monarchy, had now become its reckoning. As the cracks widened, Camilla made one final gamble, one that could either restore her crown or destroy it. There was no announcement, no press release. Just a quiet shift. Camilla's name vanished from Windsor guest lists, her suite reassigned, her presence erased. What began as a confrontation had become a quiet revolution. Princess Anne had won. It didn't happen with fanfare or scandal, but with the precise elegance only the royals know how to wield. The official narrative was simple. Camilla had chosen to spend time at Balmoral for reflection, rest, and privacy. But within palace walls, the truth was well known. She had been pushed out strategically, silently, and completely. Windsor's staff received new instructions. Camilla's quarters were to be stripped of her belongings, her schedule at the residence indefinitely suspended. No orders were to be prepared in her name, no requests accommodated. In less than a fortnight, the queen consort became a ghost inside a palace she had once tried to command. Anne moved swiftly but with measured grace. She didn't speak of her victory. She didn't need to. Instead, she took action that sent an unmistakable message. She assumed several of Queen Elizabeth's former patronage's charities and institutions that had long been sidelined or ignored under the new regime. The announcements were quiet but deliberate, each one echoing with symbolism. The late Queen's essence was returning to the fold, and it was Anne who carried her torch now. She didn't wear a crown, but the public knew exactly who was in control. King Charles, usually animated and confident in his public appearances, became noticeably subdued. His speeches grew shorter, his tone more restrained. He avoided eye contact with his sister in official settings, and while he never addressed the matter directly, his silence was deafening. Even Camilla, when she re-emerged in public weeks later, had changed. The warmth had vanished. Her smiles were brittle. Her interactions with Anne and William were cold and calculated. She stood among them, but she no longer belonged with them. And then came the people's verdict, the one judgment no royal could dismiss. Polls began to shift. Public opinion, once cautiously sympathetic toward Camilla, now leaned heavily in Anne's favor. Social media was flooded with comparisons between the two women. Anne, the defender of legacy and principle. Camilla, the symbol of intrusion and defiance. The Queen's loyal subjects had made their decision. And they had chosen the daughter who had refused to compromise. What began as a personal defense of honor had transformed into a complete reordering of power. The battle had been waged not with swords or scandals, but with silence, memory, and unshakable resolve. Camilla had gambled everything and lost. Anne had never sought power, but when forced to defend her mother's legacy, she had taken it without apology. But as the monarchy adapts to this new balance of power, one lingering question remains: what did the Queen truly fear? And did Camilla confirm it? In the margins of the Queen's private journal, a chilling line was found: the crown will survive betrayal, but not forgetfulness. As royal historians unearthed more of her private writings, a pattern emerged. Elizabeth had seen it all coming, and she left behind a warning that echoed through Windsor's cold halls. The journals were discovered during a routine archival review, innocuous at first, until a historian recognized the Queen's unmistakable script detailing thoughts never meant for public eyes. They were personal, yet heavy with foresight. Entry after entry revealed a sovereign wrestling with the future of the monarchy, fearing the rise of influence unanchored by history. In her final year, Elizabeth had grown more observant, more contemplative. Her words were layered with sorrow and skepticism. She wrote of modernity without memory, and a monarchy drifting toward applause rather than purpose. Though she never named Camilla directly, her references were unmistakable concerns over the new courtiers who smiled too much and remembered too little. Her prophecy was buried not in speeches or formal documents, but in ink-stained pages, meant for the child she trusted most to understand. Anne did understand, and when she stood before her mother's grave, months after the banishment, she carried those pages with her. Alongside the letter that had sparked it all, she placed the journal entry beneath a simple white rose at the stone's base, a quiet act of closure for a war waged in silence. The woman who had stood like stone through scandal, betrayal, and public scrutiny finally let the weight go. She had done what her mother asked, even if it meant dividing the family. And for Anne, that burden was worth carrying. William, too, felt the shift. At a military remembrance event, his speech took an unexpected turn. He spoke of legacy, not just of soldiers and heroes, but of values passed down not by instruction, but by example. He never mentioned Camilla. He didn't need to. In moments of transition, he said, "We are judged not by what we take, but by what we remember." The room fell silent, every listener aware of the double meaning. William had inherited not only the future, but the obligation to defend the past. And in that moment, his voice became the echo of both his grandmothers, the one who ruled with resolve, and the one whose name was nearly erased. The monarchy endured, but not without scars. It moved forward, reshaped by confrontation and conviction. Camilla faded into the background, her public role intact but dimmed. The firm recalibrated. The country looked on, divided yet captivated. And though the crown still gleamed atop heads and portraits, something had shifted behind its shine, a reckoning. A reminder. Because in the end, power does not decide who truly belongs. Memory does. And memory, once awakened, will not go quietly. As the dust settles over Windsor's ancient stones, one truth remains: when the memory of a queen is challenged, her defenders will rise, and exile becomes destiny. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.